updates from PSC. Welcome, Kara.
Thank you, Rose. So I wanted to, if we can go to the next slide, I wanted to start by following up briefly on some of the topics we talked about at our March meeting, which feels like a while ago now since we didn't meet in April. So bear with me, I'll do my best to touch on the things that we recall discussing with you the last time. One of the things we talked a little bit about was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, last time. And I want to thank you again for supporting our IIJA applications in that process. We submitted our second application in April, and so we're expecting to hear back on the grant awards sometime later this year, hopefully this summertime, but we don't have an exact date from the federal government on when they're going to complete that work. So we'll be sure to share any news that we have with you once we can do that. Another thing we talked about during the last meeting was we heard from the delivery system planning team and had a good discussion there. There were no immediate action items coming out of that conversation, but that team, I can attest to the fact that they're really thinking through some of the feedback that you all shared and working on developing next steps for their planning process. So this is on our list for something that we'll bring back to you in the form of some kind of update later on in the year. Another topic we discussed at our March meeting and something we heard recently from our steering committee is we heard renewed interest in creating opportunities for members to connect with one another. And so we're exploring a few ideas. Tonight's optional social time before the start of the meeting was one of them, something we also tried before in the past. We'll be talking a lot more about the Equity Forum, which hopefully will provide 2 opportunities for EAG members to connect together in a physical space, which is something we've never quite have since this group started up virtually during COVID. And so Ray will talk a little bit more about the Equity Forum later on the agenda, but just know that we're listening and open to your ideas around how can we create good opportunities for members to connect with one another and to build off of that energy. One last thing from our March meeting, you might recall the CEIP Customer Education and Awareness Program team came and talked to you all about some of their plans for clean energy education and engagement. They are really looking forward to coming back later this year to talk with you as we begin to, as they begin to ramp up their work and our work on the CEIP Biennial update, and that engagement is winding down. So more to come. In the meantime, just want to note they're really appreciative of your engagement and the thoughtful feedback that this group provides. So that's it in terms of following up on our March meeting. And if you could go to the next slide, please. I wanted to talk a little bit about recruitment. We're nearing the end of our 2023 recruitment process, and we've really met some wonderful people throughout this process and feel really fortunate that we've had such strong candidates come forward. Just to let you know, in total, we received 13 completed applications, and then a few partial applications. Those are ones where we received perhaps some basic contact information, but for some reason, the subsequent questions in the application weren't filled out and provided. So from a process standpoint and for consistency, we really only considered completed applications as we move forward towards the interview process. We completed a total of 7 interviews, and I want to give special thanks to TJ for making time to join us for most of those interviews. I can say having an EAG member participate was just really valuable. It was valuable to us and to the candidates. And TJ, I don't know if you want to share any reflections from being a part of that process. You're certainly welcome to, but I also don't want to put you on the spot. I mainly just wanted to thank you for making the time to be a part of that effort for us.
Yeah, I would say I did it last year. I did it this year. I thought this year went pretty smoothly. Just a few questions, but those questions let us get to know the new candidates. When I talked to Ray on Friday, he informed me who was chosen, and I was totally in line with the individuals who were chosen to be a part of the EAG. And I think that you all will be happy to meet them, and they'll bring something new and something fresh. So I'm excited for them to join.
Thank you, TJ. Appreciate that. And again, appreciate you for being a part of all of that. So as TJ mentioned, we're expecting to add 3 to 4 members to our EAG cadre. We'll have an official new member welcome during our next meeting, the June 12th meeting. I do want to acknowledge, though, that the first of those new members, which we just invited on Friday, so this is fresher than fresh. Monica Guevara, and Monica, that's the first time I'm saying your name, so I hope I pronounced it correctly. Monica will be joining us, and she's the Economic Inclusion Program Manager with Emerald Cities Collaborative. So we look forward to getting to know you, Monica, and the other new members as well as part of our June meeting and beyond. One thing I also want to mention is, as we think about onboarding new EAG members, we'd like to gauge your interest in being a part of a buddy system or some sort of mentorship approach to help new members kind of get acquainted and settle into their new role. This was something we discussed with the steering committee, and we wanted to gauge interest with the full EAG. So Lucila, I think, is going to do her magic and launch a poll and also put a question in the chat for y'all to consider. See, magic. I see it right there. Great. Well, while that's going, knowing that we're always, I'd like to keep us moving. If there aren't any questions about recruitment, I'd like to transition to one other topic briefly before I hand the baton from here. And I don't see any questions. I don't know if I'll scroll through. Okay, Rose is nodding or shaking her head. I mean, not nodding, but shaking. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about our stipend process. During our recent steering committee meeting, some of our steering committee members asked us to provide some additional information about our current stipend process, which we're happy to do. So all members, whether they're returning members or new members, are eligible to receive a stipend. That's something we've been doing since the EAG was established. Stipends can be paid directly to EAG members or to the organizations that you represent. We do require W-9 for our records, and then you'll receive a 1099 for tax purposes. That's assuming you receive more than $600, I believe, over the course of a year. Lisa will be reaching out to all members that aren't currently receiving stipends to see if this is something you're interested in participating in, and just please let us know if you'd like to sign up. So that's a little bit about, the nuts and bolts of stipends, and then I want to talk more about some of the stipend in the next slide, the stipend amounts and some of the assumptions we made around those. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a little history on this. We thought this came up in our steering committee discussions, and we thought this would be a good topic to revisit with the full EAG, particularly with some new members joining us soon too. It's a good opportunity. So more than almost 2 years ago now, really, we set the EAG stipend amount for EAG members meetings, and we wanted to provide a fair and reasonable stipend, but we didn't really have a lot of available data at that time. We didn't have an existing stipend policy at PSE for an effort like this, and so the $400 stipend per EAG meeting that we came up with was based on our assumption of about 5 hours, total hours for each meeting. We were thinking 2 hours for an actual meeting and perhaps up to 3 hours when you consider, pre-read materials, prep time, and then any follow-up that might stem from after the meeting itself. More recently, in the last year when we were forming the steering committee and the planning committee, and we were thinking about stipends, we looked at some regionally comparable efforts for focus groups and advisory committees, which we were finding based on our research, again, just an average. On average, we're compensating around $50 an hour. And so we looked at that rate and then made some assumptions for the steering committee and the planning committee for those efforts. again, they were new, so we didn't really know how time intensive these efforts would be. So we took a stab. For steering committees, we thought they'd meet for about an hour and perhaps have an hour of work outside the meeting. And for the planning committee effort, we thought those would also be hour-long meetings and perhaps, a half an hour of prep outside the meeting. I can say that now that we're knee-deep in the Equity Forum planning process, we're seeing a need to adjust our assumptions. I think the planning committee members can attest to the fact that our planning committee meetings so far they've been meeting more frequently than maybe we thought and for longer than we originally anticipated. So for example, the planning committee recently asked to schedule some recurring meetings through October to get ourselves set up and ready to do the Equity Forum itself. They recommended that we meet for an hour and a half for those meetings. So when we think about that change in the work ahead, we are recommending we adjust the stipend amount for the planning committee to 150 going forward. And so that's really just an overview of our current approach to stipends. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them now. I do want to emphasize that we really do value your input. And so it's important to us that the stipend amounts feel reasonable and reflective of the work that you're putting in, because we really do value your engagement. So if you have feedback on the stipend approach, please feel free to share it with PSC. You know where to find us. You can share it with your steering committee members who can bring it to the steering committee. This is something we plan to continue to work on and discuss with our steering committee and with all of you going forward.
Okay, well, thank you for having me back again. I appreciate it. I'm going to try to talk slower this time again. We'll see how much I succeed with that. So I'm Wendy Gerlitz. I'm the manager of regulatory policy here at Puget Sound Energy. And I am here to just give you a brief update on the Climate Commitment Act. We've talked about this before in past meetings. And the Climate Commitment Act, actually, if we could go to the next slide, the next slide gives an overview of the Climate Commitment Act. I'm not going to read through all of this. This is kind of a refresher. I think we've talked about, this is a law that was passed in 2021 by the state of Washington with the intent to reduce greenhouse gas emissions statewide. The program began on January 1st of this year in 2023. And it is basically, the law establishes a cap on greenhouse gas emissions and allows entities that are responsible for those emissions to trade allowances for those emissions. Puget Sound Energy is responsible for complying with this law for both our electric side of our business and the natural gas side of our business. At present, we have been looking at the obligations that we have under on our gas system. We haven't really started looking at how we're going to charge customers and reflect the costs associated with this program on the electric side yet. So that will be a future meeting. But today I am going to talk a little bit to you about how we are looking at the compliance costs for this program on the gas system and how we are planning to reflect those costs in customer bills. So if we could go to the next slide. I should say too that we've had a group of interested parties that we've been meeting with to go in depth to get feedback on all of these things. And 4 members of the EAG have been gracious enough to join us and help us with that process. So when I'm done explaining kind of where we've arrived, I will allow those folks to come off mute and welcome their thoughts and reflections on the process as well. So, so in terms of planning, so we call the means by which we recover costs from customers is called a tariff. So what we have been working toward at Puget Sound Energy is filing a tariff with our regulator, the Utilities and Transportation Commission, in June of this year that proposes a methodology for how we're going to recover costs associated with this law, and also how we will pass back some of the revenues that we receive from the law. And so the filing will include both of those elements. It gets pretty complicated and in the weeds. So, feel free to ask me questions if you don't understand what I'm going through. But again, this is just for the gas system. And so the costs, basically what we're looking at is all of the costs associated with purchasing allowances to comply with the program. So any costs associated with the allowances that we have to give to the state that they require us to give them based on how much we emit on the gas system. And then those costs, we will recover them from customers through a dedicated charge on all bills. So basically, any customer will be able to go to their bill and see what's my share of the costs of the gas system for Puget Sound Energy complying with this law. So that's really comprises the cost aspect of the filing. And then on the credit side, this is a little bit of a complicated system, but basically the state provides utilities with some allowances at no cost. And the reason why they do that is to mitigate the cost burden to gas customers. And so we take those allowances and we sell them on behalf of customers. And then we have money that we can use to help customers reduce that cost burden. So the first thing we have to do is reduce the cost burden for low-income customers. So we will take that revenue and we will eliminate the Climate Commitment Act charge for all known low-income households. So that is really any customer who participates in any other low-income program. And also going forward, anyone who signs up for a low-income program, their charge that they see on their bill will have an associated credit that will basically zero the whole thing out. So they will see a charge, credit for the same amount, and there will be no net impact to any low-income customer's bill. Then after we do that, we will have additional money that we have from the sale of those no-cost allowances. And the law says there that we are required to provide non-volumetric credits to customers. So those credits will also show on the bill, but they will be representative of the number of customers in each of the customer classes that we have. So residential customers will basically take the amount that we have for residential customers, divide it by the number of customers, and then that same credit goes to everybody. So while they might see a different charge because the charge is based on how much they use, the credit will all be the same for all residential customers. And then we'll do that for other like the commercial and industrial customers as well. So in the end, we do anticipate impacts from this, rate impacts from this. We are doing everything we can to try to offset those rate impacts through the non-volumetric credits. And then in addition, we do hope that some of the costs that we have estimated for this given year will be coming in lower than actual. And so there will be a different rate adjustment that will come in November that we hope will also lower customers' bills. So between these two things, we're really hoping that there won't be very much net impact on customer bills, but the cost of the program will be reflected on people's bills, and it will be a decent sized charge. And we will file that in June. The regulators have to approve it, and so once they approve it, then it would be effective and it would go on customers' bills. And we're estimating that effective date would happen sometime around the beginning of August if everything goes as planned. So that's kind of an overview of where we are. Like I said, we haven't started on the electric side yet. So I'm happy to answer questions or ask for members of the EAG who have participated in the more in-depth discussion to provide any clarifications or reflections that you have that might help folks.
So Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Rose. Can everyone hear me? Well, it's so good to be back. I know it's been a long hiatus since I've been with you all, EAG members, so really good to see all of you on this warm sunny day. I'm going to be quick because I really just want to provide an update on what we're about to embark on for the next 4 to 6 months as we prepare for our biennial update. If we can go to the next slide, please. So there's a couple things I want to do. I'll do a very brief history on how the EAG helped us build our last CEIP Then I want to talk about what topics we're going to hit on, what issues we're going to talk about as we build our biennial update, and I'll explain what the biennial update is. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about engagement and public participation, which you all have had a little bit of that when others came and talked about the public participation plan. So first, CETA, we always start with CETA, our 2 core tenets. The first is our clean energy milestones, getting to 80% by 2030, 100% by 2045. And the other tenet being ensuring that all customers benefit from this clean energy transition. Next slide, please. Now, how we do that is really built on our resource planning process. So there's an IRP, which is 20 years plus, a CEAP, 10 years, and then our CEIP, which is what our team focuses on, which is our 4-year roadmap. So in 2021, we put together a 4-year roadmap, a CEIP that ranged from 2022 through 2025. We are coming up on what is called a biennial update. And in the update, we're halfway through our CEIP period. We make updates on a number of different topics, a number of different items. So it's an update to the report we filed back in 2021. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and refresh everyone on what do we say in the 2021 CEIP. Well, we have some targets. We had a target, overarching goal of 63%. We had targets, specific targets related to energy efficiency, demand response, and renewable energy overall. And so what we want to do in this biennial update is, again, provide updates with some of the steps we're taking to get closer to those targets. Okay, next slide. So now I want to remind you all of, well, what did we ask the EAG when we were building that CEIP, that first CEIP? This is a list of different areas we talked about. And I think those of you who were here the first go round, and even some of you who are here the second go round, you probably remember some of these topics. We talked about vulnerable populations. We talked a lot about customer benefit indicators. We talked about some of those specific programs, whether it be DER programs or energy efficiency programs. We talked about some of those different specific actions, those specific programs, and what would be in the actual CEIP. Then, after we filed it, between 22 and up till now, you all have had conversation on program design. We talked about how should we design a specific program, how should we do outreach and education specifically for vulnerable populations, and then we talked a bit about evaluating benefits for resource planning. So now that I've kind of laid that out, if you can go to the next slide, please. Now we've got to think about, well, what are we going to bring to the EAG as we build our biennial update? And so these are a few of the topics that we're thinking of bringing to the EAG. We'll talk a little bit more about customer benefit and the data behind it. We'll talk a little bit more about specific actions that we've sort of started to move forward with in our implementation period. And we'll talk about public participation as well. So I want to go to the next slide because this is, to me, the big takeaway here. The biennial update is due, the final is due in November. And so what we want to lay out for you all as the EAG are the topics that we think we're going to cover between June and all the way up through November when we file the report. And so again, this is where I want to just provide some awareness of all the different things we're going to talk about and how those different pieces are going to tie into the biennial update once we file it in November. So understand that we've thought about what this update could look like, what we're going to put in it, and where can we have some of the EAG impact and feedback to really be foundational in the biennial update here. So each month, what we're going to try and do is focus on one core topic, one really big topic that the EAG and other PSC staff can really come in, talk about, do a deep dive on, use the feedback, what we're hearing to then affect and have an impact on the biennial update that we'll file later on in November. So again, just wanted to put that out in front so you all are aware of this. The other key thing is that as we come and present throughout these next few months, we'll start with this overarching roadmap here to let you know, okay, this is a topic we're going to discuss. Check the box. We already talked about this topic. So you all have a sense of how we're moving towards getting to that final product that's due in November. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so engagement. So you talked a little bit about the public participation plan, and it had a number of the different elements in it as it relates to the biennial update. One thing I want to mention is that we're going to have to be a little bit flexible in terms of engagement. As you know, we're still kind of awaiting a decision, and so understand that although we're going to have that flexibility, a lot of those core pieces we talked about in the public participation plan we'll continue to use throughout the next few months. And so right here, it's just bulleting some of the focus groups we're thinking about with CBOs, some of the interviews with CBOs, some of the multi-legal sessions, and things like that. Now, the other piece is, and I think Lucille is going to launch it, but what happens often, if you've been in the EAG for a while, you know that sometimes we run short on time. In fact, we're short on time now. And so one of the things we thought about are drop-in sessions, and really just opportunities where if there is a topic where we really want to dive deeper into a particular issue, let's have a drop-in session. So I think Lucille is going to pop up a poll. Oh, there it is, where we might be able to do some additional drop-in sessions. It's really just to gauge your interest or your ability to drop in if we have to have one of these and have one of those deep dives. So I'll let you all take time there, and I'm happy to take questions while everyone is submitting their drop-in session.
Thanks, Rose, and thanks for having me back. And as you said, I did present this to the planning committee. And in the interest of time, I will try to move through fairly quickly. You've had a chance to peruse the material ahead of time as well. Next slide. So I'm going to focus on discussing the requirements, sort of the strategy and the work plan, some background and context, UTC guidance, then PSE framework and approach, some quick conversation about engagement, which is so critical to equity, and then challenges and opportunities. I will go quickly so you will have time for any questions or comments that you have. Next slide. So requirements, they're generally focused on, there's some expectation around a distributional equity analysis. We are expected to do some of our own research, experiment with approaches. We can do a pilot. And then along with that, or parallel to that, there will be a commission-led process involving interested parties and other IOUs. And then once there's some direction between those different efforts, we will file for approval of a methodology that we will then use for distributional equity analysis. Along with that, we are starting to look at distributional equity analysis and an approach to doing that within the corporate capital planning process, the delivery system planning, which you heard some of that conversation. They came and presented to you some of the initial work they're doing there. The performance metrics that we had to report on, I think at the end of May, that have an equity element to those. And what I'm calling the affordability use cases, the bill discount rate, arrearage management plan, and increasing billing assistance. Thanks, Ray, for clarifying what an IOU is. I will try to stay away or explain acronyms as I go forward. And then the alignment with the CEIP, customer energy management, some of the new products, as well as participation within those programs and distribution of those programs and assistance. And then there's the targeted electrification pilot. So those are at a high level, the requirements around equity in the GRC. Next slide. So this is the strategy, and I guess you can call it my project plan or initiative plan. build out a team. So I'm in my 5th month, I guess, starting in January, and have brought on some team members to assist me with this. We completed interviews last week for the last position, and they're expecting to get that person an offer and accepted this week. So we'll be able to then complete the team and move on. A lot of the work is focused on understanding where we are currently, developing sort of goals and plans for where we'd like to go. A lot of that work has initially been completed, and then working on developing metrics and plans to sort of influence future requirements. How will we measure success and progress as we move forward? And success is sort of making sure that we are complying with the requirements that were laid out and providing a satisfactory update in the general GRC. I think that's coming up in January, but also make sure we're aligning with the work that Brian just spoke to within the biennial update. Next slide. So the background and context, there's the expansion of the public interest standard to include equity. So the conversation about energy and non-energy benefits, I think, is a key part of this. And then in the cascade order, recognizing that no action is equity neutral, and essentially requiring us to embed equity across all of our key processes and decision making and all of that. So that's the context. Next slide. So this is the guidance that was provided, and equity used interchangeably with justice as part of the framework. This is very similar to the framework from the University of Michigan Energy Equity Project, but there are lots of other things out there that sort of are complementary to this. We are making sure that this is how we are organizing our work going forward. And as we embed equity, we will be making sure that the business units are answering sort of questions around this framework of, recognition, procedural, distributional, and then restorative. I'm not going to go into sort of details about what these mean at this point. I think you're familiar with this concept, but this is going to be the way in which we'll organize everything that we do going forward based on the guidance that we've received. Next slide. And this is sort of our approach to sort of operationalizing that. So the engagement is key. Engagement at every step and in every way is going to be critical going forward. So that's why that's mentioned everywhere. I think that's the key as we see it to equity, and making sure that we're reaching all of our customers and our communities that we serve. So identifying where those, whether they're highly impacted, vulnerable, named communities, or other definitions for other projects that we might be doing with the feds around Justice 40, and some of the grants that we are applying for. So identifying, understanding where those communities are within our service territory, and when it comes to low income, identifying where those individuals are. And then sort of, and we're looking at ACEEE, oh, there I go again, American Council of Energy for an Energy Efficient Economy. They have a similar framework that we're using for certain use cases. But the idea is identify those communities, analyze whether they're similar to what Brian was just discussing, analyze whether there are gaps in how we serve those communities, and then coming up with plans to mitigate those, to show improvement in how we do that, measure success, and then repeat the process, because this is not expected to be, there's inequity, go solve it. This is going to be a process and an ongoing effort for our organization. Next slide. And then, in the CEIP, the first one we talked about, this is the International Association for Public Participation Model, IAP squared. There I used the explanation before the acronym at this time. And, for some of the use cases, some of the requirements, the commission did respond by encouraging us to engage at the collaborate level that's in red there. And this is something that we've been using at the utility, and I think it just reinforces that idea that engagement is so key and critical to everything that we do here. Next slide. And these are some of this is my last slide. These are some of the challenges and opportunities that we see out there. I think we've got to get comfortable with the idea that we're trying to figure this out as we go along, and there's, we need to be flexible and iterate, and we have to have flexibility around the use cases, but also create some alignment so that we're creating a coherent strategy for our employees, the organization, and for the communities that we serve, and the interested parties that we're engaging with, including the EAG. I think we need to anticipate that, we keep talking about named communities and others, but we have other customers that we serve, and I think we need to be ready for folks to say, what about us, right? And be able to answer that. That's one of the opportunities. We have the balanced approach, right? So this has to be about using these gaps that we've identified as a way to improve overall service to our customers, as a way to make sure that we're adding that value as part of the work that we're doing. And then, folks leveraging, right? We all of a sudden you see everything is now about, Chat GPT and AI, artificial intelligence. Before that, it was crypto, right? I mean, folks I don't want this to become the flavor of the month that people attach whatever thing they want to attach it to. And to do that, we need to be authentic, and we need to be collaborative, and we need to make it an inclusive process where we're having as many voices as possible at the table so that they can be beneficial. And then I have to put out there that, there are performance incentives that are available, and we need to make sure that we are, approaching this in such a way that we, can have access to those if we've earned it. So with that, I will take any questions or comments that you might have.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rose, and for the time. It's good to see all of you. We've been meeting with the Forum Planning Committee, the Equity Forum Planning Committee, for monthly since about September. And that is a super exclusive group that has two requirements. One, you're an EAG member, and two, you're willing to hang out with us for an hour and a half extra each month. So thanks to all of you who have made the time. I think we've made a lot of progress. And so, as Rose said, we want to share that tonight. I also want to note that, Troy's presentation, he presented this to the planning committee before, and it really ties it all together, because the topic for the forum that the group has been discussing is around the definitions of equity and accountability related to equity. And those pieces all come together in Troy's work. They come together in the CEIP, and they come together in the work that the commission is doing as well. So we wanted to make sure you have all the pieces of the story as we move forward with planning for the forum. And I volunteered to do this because we're talking about an event in September. So really just around the corner now, 4 months or so. I need to put together a budget and a plan to get approved here at PSC. So I'm going to share what I think I've heard, and I would love for those of you that have participated to please jump in at any time and share your thoughts here as we go through the slides. And then I'll move quickly too, so we have plenty of time for discussion after. Next slide, please. All right, so you're going to see the slide again, but I wanted to give you a chance to see what kind of questions are we going to ask. So of course, any clarifying questions, do you have feedback on this proposal? And most importantly, I think the thing we want to leave here tonight with is, are you comfortable moving forward with this as discussed, however it might evolve tonight? And on the right side there, we would really like to identify 2 to 3 champions to support each event. And as you'll see, we're talking about 2 events. And if we're able to have time tonight, great. We want to dig into who you might invite to these events. But as time runs out, we'll see if we have time for that or if it's a discussion we dive into a little bit later. The last thing I'll add before we go to this slide is that it's never too late to become involved in the Equity Forum. If you see this tonight and you're like, yeah, I think I want to be part of that in a more regular way, we definitely have space and opportunity for you to engage in it. It is definitely not too late. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the goals identified by the group are to share the accomplishments the EAG has had over the last couple of years and just share more generally what the EAG is about and the progress you've made. And then to collect feedback on the EAG's implementation guiding principles in the context of an equity definition. The EAG's guiding principles are documented in the Clean Energy Implementation Plan and also are available in materials that you all have had access to, but admittedly, we probably haven't put them in front of you in quite some time. And then lastly, to improve understanding of challenges and barriers named communities experience related to energy. This is a topic that, this was before my time, but that Brian and Kara and the team attempted to address with engagement in 2021 for the CEIP, but we have still a lot of work to do there. On the right side here, audiences and participants. So we talked in some detail about this. Should it be communities directly, individuals of named communities, or should it be staff at community-based organizations that serve named communities? And ultimately, the recommendation with the group that it should be staff at CBOs, and then any other organizations who can speak to the interests of named communities that might not already be represented by CBOs. Next slide, please. So what does an equity forum look like? If you go to the dictionary, there's no definition for this. We've been kind of coming up with this as we go. We had some really great ideas of interactive table activities, a conversation cafe, or as Troy used, the IAP2, International Association of Public Participation, a world cafe. This is a concept where you have multiple topics going on at multiple tables and people can move around to each table throughout the evening or whatever time the event is, and add each person that joins the conversation builds upon people who had already been at that station or at that table. Sometimes this is like with tablecloths on the table, people are writing on the tablecloth, or a note taker with flip charts. There's a lot of ways to do this. Another thing we talked about was in the sort of perimeter of the space, having an open house of PSC resources, specifically around energy assistance, the bill discount rate program, and energy efficiency opportunities. And then the assumption also is that we provide some kind of food and compensation depending on the time of day and the format, et cetera. And then the last piece on this is time and place. So we've been talking about September for quite some time. We kind of wanted to get out of the summer holidays, summer window, excuse me, not necessarily holidays, and also try to navigate around the CEIP biennial update. We also talked about making sure this was a family-friendly space and a COVID-smart setting. So I'll show a couple of pictures in a moment where we think we have thought of some ways to address that. And we discussed having 2 in-person events, one in the north end, maybe around Mount Vernon, and then another in the south end, maybe around DuPont or Lacey. Those locations aren't set in stone yet, but that's another one of the things that we want to really start to wrap our head around so we can find venues. And for example, a venue that I'll show in the next page is already reserved for every Saturday in September. So great venues are sometimes hard to come by. We also talked about an optional online meeting to create a space that's, you know, accessible for folks who may not be able to come in person. So again, something we can talk about more. Next slide, please. All right, so just a couple of example locations and also to help explain why we need to get into a little bit of detail. On the left-hand side is the Hillcrest Park Lodge in Mount Vernon. I bet some of you are familiar with it. When I saw this, I thought, wow, this is perfect. You've got a relatively large indoor space that's connected to an open outdoor space. There is a play area for children nearby. So it really is the kind of event that allows for some you know, a gathering under a roof, as well as some open space depending on the weather, and that we could have, you know, various kinds of food, activities, or entertainment for kids who might be there with their parents while everyone gets a chance to engage. This is the one I mentioned, though, that's only available on Sundays through September. On the right, if you go all the way down to downtown Olympia, Percival Landing, a similarly cool event. There's park space, open space nearby, but it's a building that only holds 25 people. So as we think about who would we invite, my instinct is 25 is probably not big enough, but that's something that's the kind of decision we'll have to make. Next slide, please. All right, so that's where I stop with this formal part. And I'd love to ask the Planning Forum committee members, those of you that have participated, if you have thoughts or corrections, feel free to tell me I got something wrong, and how we can make it better.